When you hear the word yoga, what comes to mind? Probably a studio, some stretchy pants, maybe a little deep breathing. But what if I told you that what we do today is just one single modern thread in an enormous tapestry that's been weaving for over 4,000 years? Well, today, we're going to start pulling on those threads together. So seriously, take a second. What does yoga mean to you? Is it purely a workout, a way to de-stress after a long week, or maybe it's something more spiritual? Whatever popped into your head, just hold on to it. We're going to see how your idea of yoga fits into a much, much bigger and honestly wilder story. And this is where it gets really interesting. Over on the left, you've got the modern brand. Fitness, flexibility, stress relief. You know, the yoga we see on Instagram. But on the right, that's the history. We're talking about intense ritual, serious austerity, and really complex philosophy. The journey of yoga is basically the story of how we got from that right column all the way over to the left. So our journey is going to start way, way before the yoga mat was even a thing. We're going to unravel the tangled history of this practice to figure out how in the world it became what it is today. Okay, this timeline is going to be our map. And we're starting all the way back, way back, over 4,500 years ago in the pre-Vedic period, in what's known as the Indus Valley Civilization. Let's see if we can find the very first breadcrumbs. All right, here's our first clue and our first big mystery. This little thing is the famous Pashupati seal. Back in the 1930s, an archaeologist named John Marshall looked at this figure sitting in what looks like a yogic posture and said, hey, this could be a kind of proto-yoga. But not so fast. Other scholars, like Doris Srinivasan, have pushed back, saying the evidence is pretty shaky. So it's a tantalizing hint, but definitely not a smoking gun. So let's jump forward from these mysterious artifacts to the first time we actually see the word yoga written down. We're entering the Vedic period. And trust me, what yoga meant back then is probably not what you think. So the word yoga comes from the Sanskrit root yuj, and yuj means to yoke. In the absolute earliest texts, like the Rig Veda, it meant exactly that, literally yoking horses to a chariot for a religious ritual. It was a totally practical, physical act. It was only much later that people started using it as a metaphor for yoking your mind and harnessing your breath. Now, this next idea is a complete game changer. The concept of tapas, which literally means heat, starts to pop up. You had these ascetics who started practicing really intense self-discipline, fasting for days, holding their breath, things like that, to build up this powerful inner spiritual fire. The whole idea of sacrifice moved from an external flame inward. The body itself literally became the altar. This huge shift of focusing inward really set the stage for yoga's next great evolution. This is where it gets systemized into a profound philosophical practice. This is yoga as a path for the mind. Let's check in with our map again. We are now landing in the classical period, around 500 BCE. This is the era that gave us some of the most famous philosophical texts, like the Upanishads and, of course, the Yoga Sutras. This quote from the Katha Upanishad just nails the new focus perfectly. It says, yoga is the firm holding back of the senses. Notice it says nothing about touching your toes. The goal here was to achieve a state of pure stillness by shutting down all the noise from the outside world and turning your attention completely inward. And this whole philosophy gets laid out by the sage Patanjali in his famous eight-limbed path. But look closely. Where is asana, or posture? It's step number 3. And here's the kicker. For Patanjali, asana didn't mean a vinyasa flow. It just meant sitting in a steady, comfortable seat so you could meditate without fidgeting. The body was just there to serve the mind's journey. But that was all about to change in a really, really big way. In the next chapter of yoga's evolution, the physical body goes from being a quiet background character to the absolute star of the show. Back to the timeline we go. We're taking a big leap forward to the medieval period, which kicks off around 1000 CE. And this is the era that gives birth to a brand new, kind of revolutionary style of yoga. And that new style was Hatha Yoga. All of a sudden, you have texts like the Hatha Pradipika that introduce a ton of new physical postures, or asanas. For the first time, the body wasn't just a container for the mind, it was seen as this incredible microcosm of the universe, crisscrossed with subtle energy channels and centers that you could actually manipulate with physical techniques to gain power, health, and a long life. And all of that brings us right up to the modern era. where yoga finally goes global, and in the process goes through what is probably its most dramatic makeover yet. So in the 20th century, yoga basically flowed to the West through two completely different streams. On one side, you had Swami Vivekananda. He presented yoga as this deep, spiritual science, all about philosophy and meditation, and he really downplayed the physical postures. But then you have T. Krishnamacharya. He took traditional postures and mixed them with European gymnastics to create this incredibly dynamic physical practice. And it's his students who went on to found the styles that dominate today, like Iyengar and Ashtanga. And you can see how Krishnamacharya's stream is the one that really turned into a river. As yoga spread across the globe, it got packaged more and more as a tool for modern wellness. It became a way to manage our crazy, stressed-out lives, improve our physical health, and feel a little better mentally. So when we look back at this whole incredible story, we see that yoga has never ever been just one thing. It's more like an unbroken thread that's been constantly re-dyed and rewoven to match the fabric of whatever era it's in. I mean, just think about this wild ride. Yoga transformed from a word about harnessing horses into a practice of inner discipline. It went from a search for complete mental stillness to a celebration of dynamic physical movement. It evolved from something for a few fringe ascetics into a massive global wellness industry. And it went from a deeply esoteric spiritual practice to a form of totally secular fitness. And that, right there, is the big takeaway. The secret to yoga's incredible survival over thousands of years isn't that it's some timeless, unchanging thing. It's the exact opposite. It survives because it's so brilliantly adaptable. It's always redefining what it means to yoke our bodies and minds to whatever the goal of the time happens to be. Which, of course, leaves us with one last, really fascinating question. For 4 millennia, yoga has proven it can change to meet the moment. Its story is nowhere near finished. So, what do you think this ancient and yet ever-changing practice is going to become next?